Okay, I'm making this video really quickly in response to yet another Ninja 300 fan who got on YouTube and started talking the same old bullshit. Actually, there's two of them that started talking the same old bullshit. In the meantime, I'm going to show pictures of these other bikes and stuff so you're all familiar with what's going on here. I'm sure you all have seen the R3, the Ninja 300, the R1, R6, so I put in probably the FC7, FC9. So I put in some pictures of some of the more obscure bikes here, like the Ninja 300 and the Ninja 650L and the Ninja 1000, which are bikes which were made over the past, say, 1997 to 2009, which a lot of riders probably are not familiar with. But number one, about how it's better and more fun to ride a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow. And the second thing is comparing their Ninja 300 to a car. In this case, this guy compared it to a freaking Pinto and a Charger or something with 310 horsepower that weighed 3,100 pounds. And he's saying, oh, his bike is hot shit because it's got a superior power to weight ratio. And I was like, look, dude, you haven't even considered the fact that the car has far more torque than your bike does, not to mention all the other benefits of having a car. But if you aren't going to compare them at the same RPM, then it doesn't make any sense, because what's happening is the gearing is way shorter in your bike to make up for it. And he came back with even more tales about, specifically about the weights of each one and the horsepower of each one and all that kind of, again, ignoring the red line, ignoring it and the gearing. Fine. Okay. So I'm going to make this short video and kind of this is just what it's all been leading to, is to kind of explain to people who have little to no idea how to do performance calculations for vehicles, whether it's a car, motorcycle, whatever. You can't just look at like a number like horsepower per pound without looking at the torque, because torque is what accelerates your vehicle, not horsepower. Horsepower is a number the engine makes at a certain RPM, which is multiplying the torque by 5,200 in feet in English units. I think it's 5,200 times the torque times the RPM is going to give you the horsepower. So the higher the RPM that it makes a given amount of torque, the more horsepower it will make. But the problem is it's then making power because it's spinning faster. Say if it's a 12,000 RPM red line versus a 8,000 or 6,000 RPM red line, you have to spin that motor much faster to make the same peak power. And obviously that covers much more ground in the RPM band. So in terms of acceleration, it's not a great thing to do that. It makes sense in terms of speed, because horsepower will give you your top speed, all else the same. Okay, but in terms of acceleration, it does not. You want to basically get a certain amount of torque out of that car and keep it in the power band. It's pretty much whatever you want to do, whatever the red line is, that's how you accelerate, okay? So these high RPM engines have had an advantage in racing in terms of peak speed, okay? Because their horsepower is higher, but they are not what are winning at the track in terms of low times, because they don't make the torque. They simply don't make the torque that these large engine with middling to say 6 to 7 to 8,000 RPM red lines do. I think I came up with a simple chart to explain all this. I baselined everything to the mid-size bike. In this case, for the Kawasaki's, I baselined it to the Ninja 500L, which has a top speed at red line of 118 miles an hour. And for the Yamahas, I did it with the FC7, which has a top speed red line of 133 miles per hour. And I basically changed the rear sprocket using Gearing Commander to give all these other bikes the same top speed at redline, okay? So that meant if you look at the Kawasaki's for the Ninja 300, that meant I had to drop the final gearing, reduce the final gearing in order to get it up to 118 miles an hour at redline. Same thing with the Ninja 650L, which is a vertical twin. It's got a very low red line of around 7,000 or 8,000 RPM, I forget exactly. And it only pulls like 105 at redline, so I also had to increase that. The Ninja 1000, which, believe me, is quite a fast bike. Okay, I've ridden it once a few years ago in a demo. Very fast bike, very strong engine, 16-inch front wheel if I remember correctly, but very, very potent, torquey bike. Okay, what the GSX-S wishes it was, believe me. Okay, that thing had to have the gearing increased by about 40% to bring the top speed down. Okay, I cannot even imagine that bike with gearing that's shorter by about 40% to bring that top speed down. The 10R, okay, had to have gearing that was about 50% shorter, which on that bike is going to be very interesting because the gearing is already tight as it is. When I looked at the gearing chart, that meant that there was basically a 10 mile an hour difference between each gear at redline. And then you calculate the overall ratio of the 10R relative to the Ninja 300, and it is over 150% longer gearing on the 10R at the same top speed at redline. Okay, just imagine what that means. That means it has 2.5 times, okay, times the gearing at the same top speed. That gives it a torque leverage advantage at the rear wheel of a factor of 2.5. Okay, imagine a bike which already has 75 foot-pounds of torque relative to a 15 foot-pounds per torque bike. Okay, with maybe a 50 to 75 pound weight disadvantage with a 2.5 times gearing advantage also. The bike would simply disappear. If you could get it to hook up, absolutely no question, get it to hook up, but it'd be a lot easier to hook up with much shorter gearing, okay? Because you wouldn't have to worry about having it come out of the hole at, on the power band. You could just basically ride it out. It would just disappear from a Ninja 300. Absolutely just smoke it, okay? And it would never catch it because they're doing the exact same speed at the top end. It would just disappear in the distance. The same thing for the Yamahas. This one I used the FC7, which had a little bit longer gearing to start with, and therefore a little higher top speed, despite the fact that it has about the same redline of about 9,000, which I personally think is nonsense but it has a very steep drop off in the torque curve above, I'd say about 7,000 RPM, just kind of hits the wall and doesn't really want to rev past that. But anyway, so the R3 compared to that had much shorter gearing by about roughly 20% to get that up to the 133 miles an hour hypothetical top speed at redline. I don't think it has the power to do 133 miles an hour, but that's a different story. Maybe it does. Someone ought to do an experiment and try to verify this number to see if the R3 can actually get up over 110 miles an hour. The FC9, a moderately more expensive bike with slightly more weight that has much better power characteristics. The engine revs very nicely. Very, very nice bike. I actually think that's one of the best bikes out there that you can buy for the money. 13% or shorter gearing, I should say, than stock to get to the top speed at 133 miles an hour at redline. R6, which has nowhere near the power curve of the FC9, nowhere near the torque, nowhere near the power curve. 14,000 RPM redline. You have to drop the gearing by about 25% to get that top speed down from its 150 or so stock down to 133. And the R1, likewise, had to go down about 50% to get that down from its roughly 185, 190 stock top speed down to 133, which is much more reasonable. I think that's far more reasonable for a street bike than a 185 miles an hour geared top speed in top gear. The ratio, likewise, a brutal 185%, almost 3 times the gearing of the R3 at the same top speed. And number one, remember, the R3 probably will not reach 135 miles an hour. It probably will not go that fast, even if you gear it out, okay? R1 with the same gearing, geared to the same top speed in top gear, will absolutely obliterate an R3. It will simply go into warp drive relative to an R3. And with traction control, slide control, ABS, all that kind of stuff, and a bike that weighs almost the same, you're talking about 450 versus, 395 pounds, almost the same. And especially if you can get an R1S for 12, maybe that one's maybe 450. There is absolutely no performance comparison between those two bikes in stock trim. not to mention if they're geared to the same top speed. And remember, like I said before, I just got through saying, the R3 almost certainly will not hit 135 on a straight road. Even if you gear it out to do it, it still won't have the power to do it. Now, I don't see, if you can afford the faster bike, why you would get a 300. There's no, to me, it's like buying a house, okay, that's full of stuff that you can't live in. You can, barely, like, all the rooms are, you're like buying a house with 10 rooms, but 8 of them are full of shit and you can't live in them. What's the point? You're paying $4,000 or $5,000 for a motorcycle that can get 90 miles to the gallon. That's great if you feel like you have to literally ride, all those miles and you feel like saving $5 worth of gas. Comparing a bike that gets 90 miles an hour to a bike that gets 45 miles an hour, that means, if you ride 200 miles, okay, 45, let's say 50 miles per gallon, 200 miles, okay, then, it's going to cost you what, $4 worth of gas? No, let's say it's $3 per gallon. It's going to cost you 4 gallons, okay? So it's $12 in gas to drive those 200 miles on a bike that gets 45 miles per gallon. A bike that gets 90, it'd be $6, okay? So whoop-de-doo, you saved yourself $6, okay, to travel those 300 miles. But you're doing it on a bike that can do little but drone the whole way. Little but drone. Is it not worth the $6 to get a bike with decent acceleration? Okay, and then pop $50 worth of rear sprockets and chains on it, and you get even more. Okay, even more. You can get even more acceleration out of it by doing that. At a slight cost of fuel economy. Why would anybody in their right mind spend $5,000 for a brand new 300cc bike? I have no freaking idea, unless they were an absolute pussy and had never in their right mind did they ever think they could handle a decent bike. Why else would you do it?